Hello, 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 hello. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Yes, that's the opening line from the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere by Longfellow. A very interesting poem written about a half a century after the Midnight Ride. Sadly, what most Americans know about Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride comes from this poem. And even more sad, what most Americans know about the American Revolution is just Paul Revere and his Midnight Ride. There are other history books out there that should be looked at. I mean, Longfellow, a marvelous poem that children had to read and memorize in classes for years and years. But it's not history, it's literature. But there are some very good history books out there. One of them, about the American Revolution, was written by Bruce Lancaster, The American Revolution. And for the average American, for a regular history buff, this is not a bad book. It deals with the key issues leading to and the events and so forth, but it's not for somebody who is a historian, especially if you're a military historian. It's really light on that. But because it is light in certain areas, it does miss the point on some rather critical issues. Nevertheless, American Heritage pushed it. Another more recently written book is by David Hackett Fischer called Paul Revere's Ride. Now, this is really a very fascinating book. It is well written, and it only deals with the events in Boston leading up to Lexington and Concord and the events afterwards. And of course, the key issue is the ride of Paul Revere. I found it a fascinating book when I bought it and read the thing. However, I was at the Concord National Battlefield, and there was a park ranger walking through, and someone had mentioned this book, and he said, "Oh, it's a good work of fiction." Well, before I could get up to get the guy, he walked through the room and entered in through one of those many doors. But before he left, he had mentioned that there was a book called The Lexington-Concord Battle Road, and that was put together by the Chamber of Commerce of Concord, Massachusetts, excuse me. It's a very thin little booklet here, not too much to it, but it has a great deal of information in it. And as you can see down here, my pinky finger, it not only gives the date, but it also deals with the time. So it's an hour-by-hour account, sometimes a half hour by half hour, and other times even by 15 minutes. So this was a really good investment, a very cheap book that I was able to find on the internet. So something worth knowing. The whole point of Paul Revere and the Ride is that it has been so misled. It is fit into historical legend and even lore rather than being factual. And most history books don't get it right. Back in April 18th of 1775, the British were preparing to march onto Concord. Concord had acquired 2 6-pound cannons. Where? I have no idea. But when the word got back to General Gage, he wanted it. He had also found out that the 2 leaders of the Boston Sons of Liberty, John Hancock and Sam Adams, were hiding out in Lexington, a small village that's just 2.5 miles outside of Concord. So he is going to pull his men back. 700 of his men are going to be given off duty and to rest up. And that became very apparent to the Sons of Liberty that suddenly 700 redcoats had been pulled off duty. So they decided to watch to see what was going to happen. And so they set up 2 riders who would go to Lexington through Lexington to get to Concord. The two men were Paul Revere and a second fellow, William Dawes. Well, as Revere points out, a way to let Revere know if something was going up would go to the Old North Church and go up into the steeple and put up 1 or 2 lanterns. If they were, one if by land, going to march around the bay, there would be just 1 lantern. But if they were going to cross the Back Bay, which is on the west side of Boston, if they were going to cross the Back Bay, they would put up 2 lanterns to let him know that they were going in that direction, and he would then take a boat across the Charles River, get a horse in Charleston, and ride on to Lexington. So this is going to be quite a dramatic event. Well, he gets there at about 10 o'clock, at 10 o'clock, the Redcoats are going to march out of their barracks and march to the Back Bay, and there come the 2 lanterns. Well, it is now his job, Revere's job, to go to Lexington and warn Hancock and Adams about the impending attack to take them, and then move on to Concord. At 11:30, he reached where they were staying at Hancock Clark House, and he informed them that they had better get out of there. And Dawes, who had taken the land route going down southern Boston and then up around the Back Bay, is going to show up about a half an hour later. As soon as he shows up, they're off to Concord to save the people in Concord. That was around 12. By 12:30, they're on the Concord Road, and they're going to run across a young doctor, Dr. Samuel Prescott. Dr. Samuel Prescott was on his way home after spending time visiting his fiancée. He's coming back after midnight. Okay, and they called the Puritans. His fiancée, Miss Lydia Mullinkin. Anyway, so enough. He bumps into them, and they question him, and he was able to convince them that he was from the Concord Sons of Liberty, and he agreed to ride with them. So now you have 3 midnight riders. Well, at around 1 o'clock, Prescott and Dr. Prescott and William Dawes are going to make a slight side trip to a little town called Lincoln, where they knew a member of the Sons of Liberty and warned him that the Redcoats were coming. Well, Paul Revere is not going to be so lucky. He is going to be not that far in front of them, about 200 or 300 yards. However, he's going to ride right into a patrol of regular officers. They're going to stop him, grab his reins, and put a gun up to his chest and ask him who he is, and he tells them, "I'm Paul Revere," who they knew of. Well, shortly after that, here comes Dawes and Prescott, and they ride right into the same patrol. Well, now the patrol doesn't know what to do. There are 4 of them, and we have 3 horses. Who grabs what? And Prescott is going to look at Revere and say, "Put on!" And with that, they put they kick their horses with their spurs and take off. Revere is going to ride to the right, which takes him into the forest, where he will ride head-on into 6 more Redcoats. Dawes, seeing the confusion with the 4 regulars, is going to turn around and gallop right back to Lexington. Dr. Prescott is going to turn to the left and jump his horse over a short stone wall that then takes him across an open field into the forests. He cuts his way through the forest and makes it to Concord, where he rings the town bell and wakes everyone up, and here comes the militia. So now he's informed and prepared the militia that the regulars are coming. Well, Prescott has done his heroic job, and it is Dr. Samuel Prescott, not Paul Revere, who gets the message to Concord. Sadly, Lancaster's book does not mention William Dawes, nor does he mention Dr. Samuel Prescott. If you read in his book, as it is in most textbooks that I have dealt with, it's Paul Revere's Midnight Ride that saves Concord. But what if? There's a historian's favorite two words. What if Prescott didn't have a romantic bone in his body? What if he hadn't gone and visited his fiancée? Well, if he hadn't visited his fiancée, he wouldn't have then run into Dawes and Revere. He wouldn't have joined them up. They all would have been captured. Dawes and Revere would both have been captured by the regulars, and Prescott wouldn't be there to escape and go warn Concord. And by warning Concord, it got the militia up, so they were prepared to meet the 700 British soldiers who would come into their town, and they would push them back, defeating them. What if that didn't happen? Well, then that means the British regulars could have marched right into Concord, taken the whole town, rounded up any suspected member of the Sons of Liberty. They would have then had the time to find the munitions that they had hid, and they could have crushed the uprising in Concord. And that could have started a chain reaction where all these other small towns with militias would say, wait a minute, should we really be going up against the greatest army in the world? Should we be defying the orders of King George? It could have put an end to the revolution before it even started. So I guess you could say, if it was not for a little bit of romance, we may still be British.